human sacrifice. Now, this is a legitimate question. A lot of people have this question. I remember,
absolutely.
I remember as a youngster, I was 12 years old, probably reading through this for the first time. I think when I was 11, I decided I was going to read through the whole Bible. It took me 4 years, but so I was probably about 12 when I got to Judges, I would guess. And I remember reading this for the first time, like, that's interesting,
It's a little bit odd.
a little interesting, and so I can see, this is legitimate one here. Human sacrifice. So Leviticus, I'm just going to read what they have for their contradiction on the website, just so you can get the idea of the argument, and then we're going to actually show you what the Bible really says, because they actually change and write into it what isn't really there. So Leviticus 18:21. Thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass the fire of Moloch, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. Okay, straight up, this is in the law. Don't kill babies.
Yeah, it's a pretty bad deal.
I still hold to that today.
Right.
Don't kill babies.
Yes.
I think baby killing is wrong. It's a sin. Don't do it. Okay, we agree. Don't kill babies. Bible clearly says that. All right, so then this is their contradiction that they find.
They kind of spin their own little tale here.
They do. So they get the gist of the tale, but they add stuff in that's not really there. But so you start off with just parentheses already. So this is stuff that they're kind of writing in. A little bit of a paraphrase. In Judges, though the tale of Jephthah, who led the Israelites against the Ammonites, is being told. Being fearful of defeat, this good religious man sought to guarantee victory by getting God firmly on his side. There's all kinds of bad things in this sentence. So,
Right.
So he prayed to God, if thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of mine house, first of all, nobody talks like this, to meet me when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. All right.
Right, there you go.
And then we skip down here. The terms were acceptable to God. This is one of the things that is not in the Bible, but they write it in there. Terms were acceptable to God. Remember, he is supposed to be omniscient and know the future. So he gave victory to Jephthah, and the first whatsoever that greeted him upon his glorious return was his daughter.
Which was a bummer. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a bummer. As God surely knew would happen. If God is God, true to his vow, the general made a human sacrifice of his only child to God. All right, so there you go.
So yeah,
what do we do with that? Because face value, hey, I'm going to offer whatever comes out. His daughter comes out, and he's got to fulfill his vow. God knew his daughter was going to come out, right? I mean, so.
Right, yeah. So a few
things.
Wrong things here. So first off, yes, it's clear that God says don't kill babies, and with Molech in particular, I mean, it was a very violent death. Passed through the fire. They're taking these babies and throwing them in, to hot coals and things, and they're pounding drums to not hear the screams, and I mean, just a horrible situation. God says, I want nothing to do with this. This is not good. So then you have the book of Judges now. Judges has a reputation. What happened was after Joshua, things were good with Joshua, but then after Joshua, people stopped following God. They decided they're not going to lean into what God commands and his wisdom, but they're actually just going to do what they want, whatever they want, whatever's wise in their own eyes, Mm-hmm. And so here you have one of those recollections where the people were doing what they thought was right without consideration of God. And so really nobody does good in this situation. Nobody does. Well, God does, but you don't actually see much of God in this whole story. That's part of the issue. So you have these guys that were going to be, they already kicked Jephthah out of the town, bad situation there. He ends up being like the leader of some street gang living in a cave, and then, basically, and then they come up and say, hey, actually we need a commander for our army, and we see you're pretty good with organizing volunteers, the street gang, and so they say, well, why don't you lead us in battle? And so he makes some deals with them, and then he ends up doing it. Well, he wasn't raised in the Word of God and how to live for God, and obviously the town leaders weren't either. And so he goes out there and he does things, and he makes this vow. Well, God never says anything.
Never one time
there's
says
no record
that God accepted the vow,
right,
or is in favor of the vow.
He just says it. He's going out to war. He says this, and he does have victory. Well, God was going to give him victory anyways. And the whole point was he was judging the pagan nation, and he happened to use Jephthah to do that. So we can praise Jephthah that he had faith in God enough to know that God can give the victory, and that he would. And, that part was good. He is mentioned in Hebrews 11, which is saying something for him. But then he says, "Hey, okay, so whatever was the first thing to come out of the doors that lead to my house." So there would have been like an outer, field that could have been any kind of ox, sheep, whatever. Okay, he would have had some cattle. Yeah, so he was expecting.
Clearly, he didn't intend it for it to be his daughter. That's
right,
what he's saying.
Right.
All right.
He's clearly expecting some sort of animal, and in his mind, he's like, you know what? I don't even care if it's like an ox or something, even that big. I'm going to sacrifice whatever it is, And of course, sadly enough, as we've already said, it was his daughter that came out first, trying to, just have a happy time and celebrate her father.
Came out playing at timbrels and dancing.
Yes. Doesn't that sound wonderful? It does. And so, of course, God knows the future. Right. That has nothing to do with Jephthah making a bad decision, though, because God always knows things, and we still must choose or reject him. That's our choice, So
we still make bad decisions all the time.
All the time.
Even though God knows what's going to happen.
Right. Nowhere here does God approve of human sacrifice, which is kind of what they're suggesting. They're suggesting that God is approving of this human sacrifice. It's not happening.
And then approves it. Yeah.
And plus, in Leviticus 5, if you would have known of the Word of God, that would have really helped him out, because Leviticus 5 actually gives clear instructions through a few paragraphs there, but gives clear instructions on what to do if you realize that you've made a bad vow. Because sometimes we speak a little too quick. Think about Peter the Apostle, things like that. We speak a little too quick. We say things we shouldn't. And when you realize that following through with your previous promise is actually sinning against God, then Leviticus 5 had this whole thing they're supposed to do to get out of that. So they're not sinning against God.
But you think he really did follow through with the vow
I do.
And put her to death. So,
yep.
And I'm not sure on that, but, and
that's
it's very possible.
It's a big debate.
Well, and the only reason is, when he comes home, he tells his daughter, and then she asks if she can go off to have some mourning. So she goes off to the mountains and says, "Bewail her virginity." Basically, like, I'm never going to get married. Right. And then comes back, and then in verse 39. And it was so at the end of the 2 months that she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow with her, which he vowed. Mm-hmm. And she knew no man, and it became a custom in Israel. So basically the way that verse reads, she just became a nun and never got married. He just basically dedicated his daughter to God.
If that was the vow. If the vow was a burnt offering.
It may just not have followed.
She's dead.
So I can get, I've heard both arguments and both things. So the fact is, though, it doesn't actually say he burned her. What it actually says is she just never got married.